All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday. Nice sunny day. Weather's crazy around here, hey? For days just pouring, now it's sunny. I don't know. Don't know what to tell you. So today what we'll do is we will just finish off a little bit about some BC First Nations things, and then I'll give you some time to work on your final project assignment. What was I going to say? I'm probably going to try to wrap up the BC First Nations thing maybe on Wednesday. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about, but I would like to try and squeeze in just a little bit of ancient Greece before the course ends, and so we'll kind of try to tie up the BC First Nations thing and move on. I had a whole thing on Rome, which we're not going to get to because this course is just not long enough. I'd like to cram more things in, but it's 13 weeks, right? What can you do? Okay, so let's without further ado, let's do that, okay? Yesterday we kind of did a bit of a debrief on our Museum of Anthropology trip, and one of the questions I asked you was this, right? That learning recognizes the role of Indigenous knowledge, and what can we learn from Indigenous people and Indigenous cultures, right? And so if we look at the past, learning is an important, really a critical part of Indigenous culture, right? Because we said that, as foragers or as hunter-gatherers, it's not really a ton of work. Like, it's not a lot of work to be a hunter-gatherer, but you really need to know what you're doing, right? You really need the knowledge and the skill to survive in nature, right? Because nature will kill you if it gets the chance, right? And so you really need to know what you're doing. And these people did. And of course, that knowing comes from education, right? Comes from teaching, comes from enculturation. And so for Indigenous people, they were taught in an oral fashion, right? They were taught through words, right? They didn't really write anything down. And so histories and teachings and stories of Indigenous people are oral histories, right? They're stories that people pass down by word of mouth, right? And again, it's a little bit dangerous as well, right? Because that means that it's very easy to lose these stories, right? To forget them, right? If somebody dies without telling a story, it's gone, right? And never to be recovered. And so it's kind of for people who might be interested in preserving culture or studying it, not having anything written down is kind of a scary thing. But again, this is how Indigenous people transmitted their knowledge, right? Orally, generation to generation. And interestingly, what we find is that the oral history that we have, right, so the things that Indigenous people have passed down, they do align with our European historical records. And so things that we know about sort of geological events or climate events or things that happened hundreds of years ago, our historical records are kind of in alignment with Indigenous oral histories. And so even though they pass these things down and they don't really write them down, they are reliable, right? They are preserved. These things are preserved accurately. Now, I gave you some time to read this yesterday, and I think we had enough time to read it. Let's see if we can answer some questions. We started with this question yesterday, the purpose of myth in First Nations culture, and as kind of a hint, this is the purpose of myth in really all cultures, right? What do myths do for us in culture? So okay. One or two words is not an answer. It needs to be like a sentence.
The myths tells us things that we don't know yet.
Okay. So it explains things that we don't know, right, or that we can't really determine. What were you saying about social organization?
like where the family
Right. If some families have more power or status in the community, why is that? Right? What happened in the past to give them this power or this status, right? Or this prestige? What else do myths do for us in culture? Say that one more time. An insurance of social. Oh. Right. So it teaches us values, teaches us morals, right? Teaches us what's right and wrong and good and bad and what you should and shouldn't do, right? All of those things are tied up in myth. What else? What else does myth do? Say again? It teaches what? Oh yeah, okay. Oh yeah. Sorry. We kind of talked a little bit about that, right? Morals, what you should and shouldn't do, what's good, what's bad. What else? Explain about the environment. Yeah. So how did the world, the environment, the universe, how did it come to be? Right? Why are there mountains over there and none over there? Right? What are these birds flying around? Where do they come from? Right? Where do trees come from? How did this all come to be? Where do we come from? Right? Myths help us to explain all of these things. And like Felicia mentioned, sometimes things that we don't really know the answer to, right? Or can't know the answer to. In a similar way, myth is one of the characteristics of religion, right? Myths help to support a belief system, right? They help to make it seem believable or legitimate by supporting the ideas that religion has, right? So myth has supernatural characters, or myths talk about things that happened that the religion also talks about, and they kind of support each other. They help each other out. And for Indigenous people, it's the same thing, right? That myths serve the same purpose, even though, of course, the morals and the lessons are different, the explanations are different, the characters are different. Myth serves the same function. In myth, what are transformers? Not Michael Bay's Transformers with Optimus Prime and CGI and explosions. What? Yeah. There's some sort of kind of supernatural being, and they're shapeshifters, right? They can appear as anything that they want to appear as, right? They can change their form. And what's their purpose in myth? What are they there for? Actually, this might be, I should have added one more thing to this question. Transformers are sometimes the same thing and sometimes a different thing as tricksters. What's a trickster? Because this is something that is featured in First Nations myth, but also in myths all throughout the world. What's a trickster figure? Sometimes an imposter. What else do tricksters do? It's right there in the name. They trick people, right? Tricksters are kind of agents of chaos, right? They like to cause trouble, they like to mess with people, they like to poke fun at others and cause mischief. Sometimes they get caught up in this mischief themselves and they make trouble for themselves. They kind of create a little bit of chaos. They create mischief, right? Sometimes they're transformers, You could imagine if you wanted to cause trouble, it would be much easier if you could transform into anyone or anything that you wanted to. Can you think of any trickster figures from myth or from anywhere else? Any trickster figures that you might be familiar with? In indigenous culture, it's usually the raven or the coyote. Ravens and coyotes are often trickster figures. They're both very smart, right? They're both smart animals, but sometimes they do silly things. Sometimes they do things that are, it looks like they're playing or just messing around, and so they've kind of come to have this reputation. But if any of you have watched, if any of you are familiar with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I think most people are, Loki is a trickster figure. He's a classic trickster figure. He's like a textbook definition of trickster figure, right? When you see him in the movies or in the television shows, you never really know what he's going to do, right? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he going to help you out? Is he going to stab you in the back? Is he going to do something totally good or totally awful? You never know, right? He's always a bit of a wild card, right? He can transform into anyone or anything, right? He can look however he wants. Perfect trickster figure, right? Sometimes he gets into trouble himself, right? He tries to cause trouble for other people, but winds up suffering the consequences, right? Classic trickster figure. And he is a trickster figure in the original Norse myths as well, where his character kind of comes from. So when you're thinking trickster figure, think Loki, because Loki is perfect. Perfect trickster figure. What's animism? Animism. Say what?
When they say like being sure you feel like their ancestors.
Not quite, but we did say that sometimes indigenous clans or indigenous families feel that they are descended from a certain animal, right? They have an animal that is a distant ancestor of theirs. Not quite animism, but totemism actually is what you're talking about. We won't get into that because it's an anthropological thing, but what you're describing is actually totemism. But animism. Yeah.
I think a person who believes that the animals, plants, and other like natural phenomena has a spirit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a belief system known as animism.
Yeah. So this is the idea that things have spirits, right? Animals have spirits, plants have spirits, rocks have spirits, the rivers have spirits, the mountains have spirits. All these things are animated, right? Not like Pixar animated, but they're animated in that they have a spirit, right? And indigenous people perceive the world this way. Things have spirits. Shamans, what are shamans?
Oh, those who live in the fingers and stuff. Like the priests.
Yeah, to use our characteristics of religion, shamans are religious practitioners, right? There are supernatural powers, and the shaman knows how to interact with them, right? And sort of manipulate them. Shamans are people who have a foot in both worlds, right? A foot in our world and a foot in the spirit world. And they can move between the two. Is it true? Only if you believe it. It's not an answer, I know. But indigenous people believed it, right? And so, yeah, shamans can do this. And sometimes shamans were picked because, again, they were in some way kind of different, right? They had something that set them apart from other people. Interestingly, sometimes people with epilepsy would be chosen as a shaman because when they would have seizures, indigenous people would think, oh, they're in the spirit world, right? That's where they go. And so they have a seizure, and then they come back, and it's like they've returned. Right? So sometimes that happened as well. But shamans are people who are believed to be able to communicate with the spirits, enter the spirit world, and return, and sort of do these ceremonial things or sort of magical things, or conduct healing, or any of those kind of ceremonial things.
The normal people become a shaman.
How do normal people become a shaman?
Like,
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing. Some people like to, they kind of. It's such a weird thing. If you're in an indigenous culture, the shamans are usually chosen, right? And usually by other shamans, right? Other shamans figure out, who should be a shaman, right? They're able to kind of identify who's the best person for this job, right? But there are some people who are kind of into like new agey kind of things, and they like to sort of pretend that they're a shaman as well. I think it's kind of BS. I think it's people who are kind of like into crystals and healing and sort of meditation, and they kind of like borrow things from all kinds of different ancient cultures, and they make their own little belief system, and I don't know. I think it's kind of strange. So some people like to say that they're a shaman, but real legitimate shamans are people who are part of an indigenous group in which everybody believes in that system, right? This is the thing, right? In order for beliefs, particularly religious beliefs, to work, everybody kind of has to believe it, right? If everybody believes it, it has power. If nobody believes it, it doesn't work. You know what I mean?
Some groups at first follow them,
Yeah.
and they get power. And if you do not follow them, you will be get out of their groups. So because their power makes with our followings what they can.
Yeah, maybe. Here, can I give you an example of how this works? Okay. Not so much in indigenous cultures, but in some cultures, they practice and believe in black magic. Okay? So this is the idea that you can use magic to curse other people, right? You can cause bad things to happen to them, okay? And not only can you do this, but you can do it without knowing it, okay? So I could actually use black magic to negatively influence somebody and not even really know, okay? So let's say, let's say, I don't know, Kenny, for instance. So Kenny's walking to school tomorrow, okay, and he trips on the curb when he's walking to school. He trips and he falls and he bruises his knee a little bit, okay? Ouch. What's that?
Oh my God.
Yeah, right? Yeah, limps to school, oh, really hurts, right? Now, if we were kind of in a culture that believed in black magic, you might go to the shaman, okay, and say, oh, I really hurt my knee, can you help me? And the shaman might say, okay, sit down, and he might rub some ointment on your knee. Maybe he'd apply some heat. Maybe he'd get you to drink a certain drink, right, to reduce the inflammation, right? Do all these things, medical kinds of things. But then he'd also talk to you about, what happened? What happened when you tripped, Kenny? And Kenny would tell the shaman, oh, well, I tripped. I was on my way to class, and okay, and, how's class going? And Kenny might say, oh, it's going fine. Yeah, but I was late. I was late yesterday. And the shaman might say, oh, really? Very, very interesting, right? You were late. And so the shaman would probably wonder, maybe I should talk to the teacher. And so the shaman might come to me and say, hey, how are things going? How's class? And then I might mention, oh, Kenny was late yesterday. Ugh, right? What a jerk. Sorry, I'm just teasing here. What a jerk. Kenny was late, really annoyed me. Grr, right? And so the shaman might be like, aha, right? There's the black magic, right? Kenny came in late. I had some negative thoughts about him, right? I didn't say anything to Kenny. I just said good morning, but I was inside. I was like, and I used black magic, and then he tripped and fell, right? I caused that with my thoughts, right? So the shaman might say, okay, we've got to fix this. We've got to remedy this. There's bad magic floating around here. We've got to fix this. And so the shaman might get Kenny and I together to talk it out. I might tell Kenny that, hey, I was really disappointed that you were late yesterday. Kenny might say, gee, I'm really sorry, I overslept or something. Kenny and I would kind of work it out, right? And we'd be good with each other, right? We'd mend the relationship. And then the magic would be dispelled, right? It would be neutralized. And so, of course, we here in the Western world who don't generally believe in that, we would all roll our eyes and say, it's ridiculous. There's no black magic, right? I can't make Kenny trip on the curb on purpose or by accident. I can't do that with my mind, right? And I can't. But it doesn't matter, right? Because if everyone believes that this is how it works, if everyone believes in black magic, then it does two things, right? First, the shaman is kind of a mechanism for ensuring that the community continues to get along, right? Kenny tripping and hurting his knee is just it's a flag to the shaman that something's not right? I've got to investigate. I've got to see what's going on. And then when we find an interpersonal conflict, even if it's not out in the open, the shaman helps to fix it, right? And that helps to keep the group together, right? It helps to keep the group cooperating well. And we're all going to pay very careful attention to our thoughts, aren't we? Because most of us probably think that we can think whatever we want, right? I can not like that person and I can stare at them and just think awful thoughts and they'll never know, right? I can do that. But in a culture that believes in black magic, you can't do that, right? Your thoughts are very powerful, right? They can influence reality. They can hurt people, right? So you have to be very careful about what you think. You have to think well of people, because otherwise you could inadvertently hurt them, right? With just by using black magic without even trying to, you could hurt them, right? So again, is black magic real? No, of course not. But if everybody believes that it is, it has a function, right? It actually helps the group stay together. It helps the group cooperate. It minimizes group conflicts, or it gives them a way to solve those conflicts. It's very useful, right? Is it real? Not really. But
It is like karma, I think.
karma's the same thing, right? Is it real? I personally don't believe in it. Some people do, and that's okay. But yeah, is it real? Probably not. Does it serve a function? Yes, right? It encourages people to do good, right? Because good things will come from doing good, right? So yeah, so a lot of these things, don't work the way that people say they work, but they do have a function, right? If people believe in them and practice them, they work, right? There's a reason for them. And black magic is the same thing. Not real, in my belief. Not real, but very functional, right? And so for the shaman here in indigenous culture, sure, they may believe in some things that aren't really real, but the practices of the shaman are useful for the group, right? They do something to reassure people or to explain things to people or to keep the group together, cooperating, to minimize conflicts, to help them exert control over things that they don't have control over. All of these things are kind of useful, right? And again, maybe they don't work quite the way people say they do, but still, there's still benefit, right? Oh, okay. Wow. Are we gonna have to? You know what? Let's come back to this because since we're talking about these things, we'll come back to these other questions in a minute. Wow, the sun's just bouncing off the. It's not that. It's yeah. No, it's not you. It's here, but that's okay. I'm just gonna back up a little bit. Let's talk about myths here because we've said this before. You've seen this slide before. Myths are. Yeah, myths are stories that are passed down from generation to generation, right? They usually contain some aspect of the fantastic, right? Something that's out of the ordinary. And of course, they contain a lesson or a moral, okay? Now, I'd like to share this with you. Oh, sorry. Before I share that with you, also remember the power of story from Jonathan Gottschall, right? We watched that TED Talk way back. And Jonathan said that why do we tell stories, right? He said humans are driven to tell stories. They're consumed by stories. They think of their life as a story, right? Everything is kind of organized in your mind in story format. And so humans tell each other stories, yes, to communicate to each other, but also to experience and to share emotions, right? You can't. Is there another way to make, like if you felt a certain way, if you had a certain emotion, and you wanted someone else to feel the same way as you, is there any other way to do it without telling them a story? Either the story that made you feel that way or just another story? What's that? Yeah, but you kind of need the story though, don't you? Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know that you could get someone to feel the same way as you unless you told them the story, right? I feel a certain way today, and I'd like you to share my feeling, but the only way for me to share it with you is to tell you why I feel the way I do, right? To tell you the story of why I feel this way. I can't like touch your head, right? It's like touch your head and, oh, I get it, right? No, like we can't do it that way, right? Story is really the only way that we can accurately do it. Songs are stories, right? I felt this way when my girlfriend broke up with me, and now you're listening to the song and you feel the way I feel, right? Sorry, that was terrible. But that's what songs are, right? Taylor Swift has made an entire career out of doing just that thing, right? I went out with this guy, and then it all ended in tears, and now I look back on it and remember it all too well, or whatever, right? That's her whole thing. But so yeah, we communicate, we share emotions this way, and we kind of describe our experience through story, okay? Just want to remind you. So this is what I want to share with you. This is an Indigenous story from Canada here, and it's called Raven Steals the Light, okay? And so this is, in one way, a creation story. We'll talk about that. Is there a moral to this story? Is there a lesson? Is there something that Indigenous people are trying to teach each other or teach their children from this story? Are there any similarities between this myth and other myths you might know? Okay, any similarities? And we've already talked about this, but Raven in this story is a trickster. He's a trickster figure, as he often is. Not always, but most of the time. What does that mean? Okay, so for online people, of course, I have the link and the questions in Microsoft Teams. They're posted there. And so I'd like to watch this. I'd like to watch this video of this story and then answer these questions, okay? So link and questions in Microsoft Teams, we'll watch and then we'll come back here, okay? All right, so a little bit of animation. Maybe not the best animation we've ever seen, but that's okay. Um, in what ways is this a creation story? How is this a creation story?
Created by human, just like the raven can steal your son.
Okay. Yes, the raven stole the sun.
Why you suddenly get pregnant after you drink that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's created.
How can the father and the daughter not suspicious of the baby?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
It's the father.
this is the thing, right? Well, myths are kind of strange, right? You kind of have to just go with the story. Don't apply logic to them. Logic doesn't work.
That's why this is a creation story.
Yeah.
How is it a creation story?
You can't apply logic inside it yet.
There's no logic.
Yeah.
No, I know. You can't apply logic to these stories. They're
That's why
not
This is a creation story.
they're
Oh,
There's
just
no
an
logic, yeah.
imagination.
because there's no logic?
Not much logic.
It's just like human's imagination to make this kind of story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All stories are like that, unless they're true, right? All stories are products of human imagination. This one is too. It's not, there's some plot holes, I'll give you, but how is it a creation story?
What do you mean by creation?
Well, creation stories tell us about why the world is the way it is. Where do things come from?
The sun.
Because they don't know where the sun, the moon, and the stars came from, so like they create this kind of story to tell to their generation
Yeah.
how the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Exactly, right? In this story we find out what the sun is and where it comes from, right? What's the moon and what's the stars? Why is there light everywhere, right? We learn it in this story, right? And it's Raven who kind of sets all these things in motion, right? By stealing the light from Skyfather, right? What about a lesson or a moral for this story?
Next time when your daughter get pregnant, check the father.
Say that again?
Next time when your daughter get pregnant, you
Don't-
need to check the father.
Check the father?
Yeah.
Well, there is no father, right?
This is a purpose.
She could-
She adapt a weird stuff as his grandson.
True, you're thinking too logically.
But it's true.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
There's no moral, suddenly get
Even the
pregnant.
father of the daughter does not seem suspicious with the baby, where the baby came from.
He's not, right?
If the Sky father have a son and his son get pregnant, it will make sense. His son drink the water, then he get pregnant.
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of questions that are not asked about that kid that really should have been asked, but again, you got to let it go. Myths are weird, right? Myths are weird. But there's still some lessons in here, I think. Right? What about does Skyfather do things that are probably not that good?
He steals all the light and not share it to the others.
Yeah, he's collected or stolen all the light, and he doesn't share, right? He doesn't share it with anyone, and as a result, everyone is negatively affected, right? His daughter can't find a husband, right? Raven can't.
That's her goal. That's not
Raven, well, yeah, Raven can't find anything to eat, and he's flying into trees because he can't see them, right? I'm sure there's all kinds of other animals and people who are struggling in the complete blackness, right, with no light. And so Skyfather is being selfish, right? And everyone else is suffering, even his own daughter, right? And he's trying to hold on to her as well, right? It says he fears that she will leave him, right? And so that fear causes him to hoard this light, right? To selfishly hoard it and to hurt everyone else and to hurt his daughter, right? Because she just wants to find a husband, but he's afraid of her leaving. And so he keeps the light to keep her there, right? That's kind of selfish, isn't it? And hurtful to her and to everyone else. What else? Is there anything else to learn from this story?
Maybe if you share that light with daughter, other ones, finally he would have more power than them. That the final that he get the result, it was not good for him.
Yeah.
But maybe if he shared that,
Maybe.
he would have more power.
Sure. Maybe if he shared, he would have a better result, right? Maybe people would look on him more favorably, right? If he shared rather than having the light stolen from him. Who do we have to thank for the light? Raven, right? But we could have thanked Skyfather, right? Skyfather could have shared it, and we all could have thanked Skyfather for the gift of the light, right? But instead, he was selfish, and now we thank Raven instead, even though Raven is, he's a thief in this particular story, and he, gets this woman pregnant as well. But that's a whole other story. Any similarities between this myth and other myths that you know? Huh?
Has it have logic?
The logic doesn't work here.
Well, yeah, other myths also has like a meaning inside that we can learn a moral.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was thinking more like specific things in the myth that remind you of other mythical stories. No? There's one that jumps to mind for me is there's a Greek myth of Prometheus. And Prometheus steals fire from the gods to give it to humans. And of course he's punished afterwards for stealing. But Prometheus brings fire to human beings because he loves them so much. And here Raven brings the light, maybe not because he loves humans, but still we enjoy it, right? Is there any other similarities? Other myths? I was kind of hoping you guys would have some, but if you think of it, let me know. And finally, last question before we break. He's a trickster figure. Raven is. What does this mean? What's that?
He likes to play around for people.
Yeah, he kind of he'll play tricks, he'll deceive people, he'll try to do things for his own reasons. Sometimes he'll get in trouble, sometimes he'll do bad things, sometimes he'll do good things. You just never know, right? And Raven is just trying to, and interestingly, at the beginning of the myth, Raven says he wants the light so that he can find things to eat and fly around, but also so he can go amongst the humans and trick them and cause mischief, right? So his motivations here are not entirely good, right? Yeah, he's not saying, "Oh, I'll get the light," and humans. Yeah, he's acting out of his own interest here, but he's still going to wind up doing something good for all of us, kind of by accident, right? Not on purpose. And again, he almost gets himself into trouble, right? Skyfather threatens to eat him and chases him across the sky. So he almost gets eaten by Skyfather in the process. So trickster figures are like this, right? Kind of, they create chaos, they create mischief, they do things for selfish reasons. Sometimes they help, sometimes they hurt, sometimes they wind up hurting themselves in the process, but they make things happen, right? And Raven definitely makes things happen in this story, right? Okay, good story, interesting story, except for the parentage of the child. I know that threw you a little bit. Yeah, myths are weird like that, right? What's that?
Where even the daughter of this grandfather came from.
I'm sure there's another story that explains that. I don't know what it is.
For the similar myth, in Europe we have one of our most popular women, which is called Mariam, I think.
Mariam?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mariam. Maybe the Christians called him the mother of the Jesus.
Okay.
Yeah, she gave birth without any husband.
Right.
It's like that.
Right. Here in this story, we have an immaculate conception, right? This woman gives birth to a child where there's no father, right? And again, that happens in Quran, right? And in the Bible?
No, it's in Quran.
Is it in Quran? So in the Quran and in the Bible, we have a woman who gets pregnant with no, no man involved, right? It's just,
It's Jesus' mother.
yeah, Jesus' mother becomes pregnant with no help from Joseph.
They already
Christians call him Jesus.
Yep.
The boy, I mean, but
Yep.
we call him Muhammad.
Call him Muhammad, yeah. So different names, right? But the story is kind of broadly the same, right? And
But can we call it myth because it was real?
well, yeah, but that's the thing about myth, right? If you believe it, then it's part of your belief system, right? And it is real. So for indigenous people, they don't call this myth. They call this is story, right? This is religion. This is how the world was created,
No,
right?
It is in talking in science,
Yep.
it is acceptable because some animals can reproduce with themselves.
Yes. Not humans but not humans. So yeah, again, whether something is you think of myth or not does depend whether you believe it, right? If it's part of your belief system, then you don't say myth, right? You say religious teaching, right? You say story, you say, Quran or Bible or Torah, right? Again, if you're talking about a culture that is not yours, then yeah, you call it myth because we don't really believe this, right? We don't believe that Raven stole the light. But indigenous people did, right? And indigenous people didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, immaculately conceived by Mary, right? They didn't believe that. They believed something else. So again, what you believe kind of determines whether it's myth or whether it's actual religious teaching, right? Okay, let's take a break.
Yes.
And then when we come back, I'll give you some time to work on your stuff, okay?
Oh, so you will give us. You would always stop until the class ends.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay, let's take a break though. All right. So, for the rest of the time, people, we've got a little more than a half an hour left. I was going to give you that time to work on your final project, so I will turn you loose to do that. If you have questions, of course, you can ask me, but I'll just let you go, okay? Like I said, tomorrow we'll try to finish off the BC First Nations stuff. We'll move on to ancient Greece, which is kind of a strange transition, but it is what it is. But until then, yeah, I'm going to let you do your work, okay? So for online people, I'm going to end the live stream here, but yeah, you can always send me a message and I'll reply to you, okay? So yeah, so I'll let you get to work, and yeah, good luck with that. Okay.